I'd like to call to order the Rutherford County School System regular meeting, August 8th, 2024. We will now have the honor of the Pledge of Allegiance from Mr. Coy Young.
Thank you, Ms. Bratton. It's my honor and privilege to call out Elam Young and Hank Young, my two grand boys, to lead us in the pledge tonight.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much, boys. You did a wonderful job. We appreciate you being here, and thank you, Mr. Young, for allowing us to see those young men. We are now going to have a moment of silence. Thank you. Board, I would like to draw your attention to the agenda. Is there anything that we need to look at on the regular agenda? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Anyone wishing to abstain? The agenda has been approved. I now direct your attention to the consent agenda. As you probably have already flipped through that several times, is there anyone who wishes to change or look at anything on the consent agenda at this time? Seeing no questions, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, no. Anyone wishing to abstain? The consent agenda has been approved. We have no speakers for public comment tonight, so we will go directly to number 7, instruction.
First, the Carl D. Perkins Basic Grant. The Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act of 2018, known as Perkins 5, is presented for approval for the funding period of July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. The grant is for $754,876.90. The Carl D. Perkins Basic Grant provides funding for program improvement, equipment, travel, and staff development for our career and technical education teachers. Recommended motions to approve the Carl D. Perkins Basic Grant for $754,876.90 to provide funding for program improvement, equipment, travel, and staff development for our career and technical education teachers.
Do I have any questions on the Carl D. Perkins Grant? I notice that Ms. Tyra is here in case we need her. So, Ms. Sharp, do you have a question? You're just waving.
We're just waving.
Ms. Sharp is now waving. Now, does anyone else have a question or a comment for number 7-1? If not, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve. Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Anyone wishing to abstain? The motion carries. Number 2.
Number 2, the Carl D. Perkins Reserve Grant. The Carl D. Perkins Reserve Grant is presented for approval for the funding period of July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. This competitive grant is for $50,000. The Carl D. Perkins Reserve Grant provides funding for HVAC trainer simulators and trainings from the Mechanical, Electrical, and Plumbing MEP CTE program of study instructors at Oakland High, Rockville High, and Smyrna High. Recommended motions to approve the Carl D. Perkins Reserve Grant for $50,000 to provide funding for HVAC trainer simulators and training for the Mechanical, Electrical, and Plumbing MEP CTE program of study instructors at Oakland High School, Rockville High School, and Smyrna High School.
Any questions or comments? Tyra is here if you need to ask her anything. I see Brian's here. You have something?
I just want to correct, we do not, we had a question about Laverne the other night. I think we got rid of the MEP program for welding. Is that correct?
That was in the additional information that Dr. Chastain sent out today.
Awesome.
Okay. Anyone else? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Young got that second, I think. Okay. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Anyone wishing to abstain? Motion passes. Number 3.
Updated job title for ESL. The ESL department is requesting to update and consolidate the titles of ESL coach with Tier 1 emphasis and Title I ESL coach to ESL support specialist. This would allow these positions to work with all schools and teachers as opposed to Title I schools only. Recommended motions to approve the change in titles as presented. The budgetary impact for current positions moving from coach to specialist would be $16,417.90.
Questions or comments on number 3, updated job title? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve. Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Anyone wishing to abstain? Motion passes. Number 4.
Lead ESL teacher stipends. The ESL department is requesting the approval of lead ESL teacher stipends for the 24-25 school year. Each school will receive $1,000 for a lead ESL teacher stipend. The school may decide to split the position between 2 ESL teachers, which will provide $50,000, that would be wrong, $500 to both lead ESL teachers. Stipends will be paid per semester in December and May during the 24-25 school year. Title III funds will be utilized for these stipends. Recommended motions to approve the use of lead ESL teacher stipends for the 24-25 school year.
I was about to become a CTE teacher there for a moment. Do we have any questions or comments? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you. I will entertain a second.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Anyone wishing to abstain? Motion passes. Number 5, CTE stipends.
Number 5, CTE stipends. Curriculum Instruction CTE department would like to allocate approximately $15,000 of Perkins 24-25 funds to support the CTE curriculum team leads for our high school CTE career clusters. The purpose of the CTE curriculum team lead would be to help develop the instructional capacity of teachers, industry partners, and students within our county. The leads will be responsible for conducting in-person virtual meetings for career cluster PLCs and advisory council meetings. The allocations are: each participant receives a $500 stipend for conducting professional development sessions and advisory council meetings through the PLC framework by CTE career clusters. And you have the individuals in the career cluster listed. On the next page, recommended motion is to approve allocating approximately $15,000 of Perkins funds to support the CTE curriculum team leads for our high school CTE career clusters. Each participant will receive $500 stipend for conducting professional development sessions through the PLC framework by CTE career clusters across the district to support teacher and student success.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Concerns? I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Anyone wishing to abstain? Motion passes. Number 8, financial matters.
First, we have board recognition of the Eagleville High School Football Booster Club. Eagleville High School is an RCS school support organization, SSO. Per RCS Board Policy 2.404, only a group or organization has entered into a written cooperative agreement with the board may use the name, mascot, or logo of the school or the school district to solicit or raise money, materials, property, security, services, or other things of value. The EHS Football Booster Club has provided all information requested from the board's written cooperative agreement and can be recognized as an RCS SSO. It is noted that this SSO has not applied and received an IRS determination letter to be recognized as a 501c3 nonprofit entity that is in compliance with the BOE written cooperative agreement. The IRS letter allows the SSO to open and operate out of a checking account that is separate from Eagleville High School student activity funds. Until the determination letter is applied for and received, the Booster Club will utilize the Eagleville High student activity funds for all its financial activities and be subject to the BOE financial policies and procedures. Also, the approval is contingent upon the organization providing an updated, detailed financial policy which they've been notified about. Recommended motions to approve the Eagleville High School Football Booster Club at Eagleville High School as an RCS school support organization, SSO.
Do you have any questions about the Booster Club? Do we have any comments? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you. I will entertain a second.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Anyone wishing to abstain? Motion passes. Number 2, Fund 177.
Fund 177, budgeted revenue and expenditure approval. This Fund 177 capital project revision is presented to the board to approve the budget for the capital projects fund that was finally approved by the Rutherford County Commission on June 24th, 2024 in the amount of $18,977,525. This approval by the board is technical in nature is needed in order to follow the budget processes set forth for Fund 177 for the fiscal year 24-25 fiscal year. Recommended motion to approve the final amended Fund 177 capital projects budget is presented. As we talked about at our work session, the original budget passed by the school board and health and ed through the budget committee had about a $800,000 reduction by the time it got through to the floor. So this is just accepting the money they actually gave us.
Questions or comments on this? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Anyone wishing to abstain? Motion passes. Number 3.
Fund 141, fund balance amendment and design funding request. This combined this item and then one of the last ones from the back page from the work session.
This is the new motion, right? Okay.
This amendment is to fund the design fees for the Beatty Middle School project. This project will be funded by amending General Purpose Fund 141 by decreasing 39,000 unassigned fund balance and increasing operating transfers account 99,100,590 transfers out in the amount of $3,700,000. Engineering Construction Department is also requesting to move forward to Health and Education with the design funding request. This request is in keeping with the 24-25 building program schedule, and the recommended architect is GMC. The amount requested is $3,700,000 based on a construction budget of $74 million. Recommended motion to approve the GPS fund budget amendment of $3,700,000 of both unassigned fund balance and operating transfer expenditures as presented in detail and to request design funding from Health and Ed for the Beatty Middle School property is presented. Can I add one thing?
You can.
This is at least going to be my recommendation, all that we take out of fund balance to be able to fund the middle school. They don't have an additional revenue source for us to be able to pull this out of right now to get started, but we've got to get started to get the bids in, and then it'll be our recommendation to go to the county to fund the entire portion of this for the actual construction.
Questions or comments on this motion?
Ms. Bratton?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Dr. Sullivan, I know you went and said last Tuesday, but can you reiterate again? So we're getting the cost to approving the cost for the fees, for the design fees, and then it's going to take about 6 months for the architect to bring those plans to us. And then after that, we got to approve the fund. Well, as a board, we're going to have to approve the cost of the construction so that we can go before the county commissioners and to officially ask for them to go before the bond market. So when is that? When do you expect that tentatively with this timeline, we will go to them, meaning the county commissioners, for the ask?
And talking with the county finance director, we need to go and ask very similar to what we did last year in February or March. I know that's a quicker time scale than we want, which is what we're always doing. This is the plan to be a 2-story building using our current prototype and just taking, and Trey worked on this, and I appreciate his work on it because I think it takes a good design and makes it even better. You're basically taking, if you think of our new middle schools that we've been, well, I say new, the last 20-year middle schools we've been building, it takes the first and second wing and puts them on top of each other. And so you lose that footprint. All you have to do is build those on top of each other, move the library on the other side of the auditorium, and we save quite a bit of space.
So we will expect to go.
I need to ask them at the latest by March.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's a good question.
And
Thank
then that will hopefully, if everything goes smooth, there's no underlying variable or factor or anything that's uncontrollable, then we can hopefully meet the deadline for the new middle school to begin in 2026, 2027.
Hopefully. We're getting to the point where we may run out of miracles, but that's our plan.
That's our plan.
Anyone else?
Ms. Brennan,
Yes, sir.
the design you're talking about, is that like the John Coleman?
It is the Rocky Fork Middle Whitworth Buchanan design. You would just take the first wing, which is classrooms and some small intervention, and then you take the middle one where the auditorium is and build them on top of each other.
I do have floor plans that I could email out to you all for you to see, and a artist rendering now. So I can email those out to you for you to look at.
Thank you.
These middle schools will still be built on the mini-school philosophy design as we have done all of our buildings since I was here in 1492.
1492.
Since we did it at Central Middle School, that was not built that way, but we made it be that way. But all of the middle school designs now focus around having the small school within a school, and all this does is just put it on top. So it'll work. It'll work. Okay, other good questions? All right, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Anyone wishing to abstain? Middle school design passes. New extracurricular supplements.
And just for everyone, we will go to Health and Ed on August 27th to request that. So it'll go before the full commission. August 27th will be when this goes before Health and Ed. On September 5th, we'll send Brian and Kay over there, and they will be at the Budget Committee to request this. And then September 12th is the County Commission meeting, which we have TSBA Fall District meeting that day. So it looks like Dr. Martin and Brian are going to be going to that one too. Have fun.
Fun? Let us know. Text us. Anyone else have a question on that? Did you get that timeline down that does he need to say it again? Everybody got it? Okay, good deal. New extracurricular supplements.
These were budgeted, but we did not technically approve the extra supplements. Flag football, 4% head coach. This is high school. Flag football, high school, 2% assistant. Lacrosse, high school, 6% head coach. High school athletic director, 6%. Elementary archery, 4%. And then fine arts, elementary choir, 2%. Middle school theater, 4%. And high school theater assistant, 4%. And we will look at all supplements as part of this upcoming budget cycle.
Good. Anyone have questions about the new extracurricular supplements? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Anyone wishing to abstain? Extracurricular supplements have passed. Policy adoption, first and final reading.
I believe I probably need to go down to the motion to suspend board policy 1.600 first. Otherwise, we would be, oh no, Mr. Reed, what do you suggest? Yep.
Okay.
So since we have started the school year, these policies are all recommended on first read. To be able to approve them on first read, I'm going to go to the bottom of page 17, which waives the requirement for 2 readings. So recommended approval, motion to suspend board policy 1.600 to specifically waive the 2 reading requirements for the above policies as presented.
All right. Questions about first reading? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve. Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Anyone wishing to abstain? These will be approved on the first reading.
And I don't believe we need number 2 because you want these read as a roll call for each one,
I
correct?
will, yes, I am going to take a roll call vote for each
So we will not
one.
need number 2. All right, let's go all the way back to the beginning.
Back to the beginning. We will read these separately. They will be voted on separately, as we decided in the last couple of policy meetings, and they will be voted on roll call vote. Buckle your seatbelts, folks. We got some policies. Are we ready? Starting with 1A.
All right, policy 1.501, visitors to school, adds code of conduct for visitors to the schools pursuant to a change in state law.
Questions or comments? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you. I'll entertain a second.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp?
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. Policy passes. B.
Policy 1.800, school calendar, adds language for school closure for presidential primary election or regular November election pursuant to change in state law.
Any questions? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second. Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp?
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. C.
Policy 2.403, surplus property sales, adds language for notice of surplus to be also published on the news and information website pursuant to change in state law.
Any questions or comments? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp?
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. Thank you. D.
Policy 2.806, bids and quotations, adds language for publication to also be published on the news and information website pursuant to change. I just read that one, didn't I? No.
No,
Pursuant to
you're right.
change in state law.
You're right. Everything is pursuant to change, so
Yep.
it seems like you're repeating yourself. Questions or comments on bids and quotations? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp? Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. Policy passes. F. I meant E.
Policy.
Just seeing if you were
Yep.
awake.
Policy 3.202, Emergency Preparedness Plan, adds language to develop procedure for identifying the cause of fire alarm activation pursuant to change in state law.
Right. Questions or comments on E? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you. Thank you. Roll call vote.
Ms. Sharp?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
And Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. Policy 3.202 passes. F.
Policy 3.205, Security, adds language requiring principals to immediately report certain types of assaults and certain acts of vandalism to the Director of Schools and law enforcement pursuant to change in state law.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell? Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp?
Yes.
And Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. F. Policy 3.205 passes. G.
Policy 3.400, Student Transportation Management, adds language requiring board to issue certificates to bus drivers, also adds notice to be posted on bus stating that only authorized individuals may enter pursuant to change in state law.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you. I'll need a second.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp?
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. Policy 3.400 passes. Policy 4201A.
And the board has a copy of this as the one we discussed Tuesday night, changing the grade levels that we had it as 9 through 8 instead of 6 through 8.
Right.
So policy 4.201, class size ratios, adds language to modify class size requirements for CTE classes for grades 6-8 pursuant to change in state law.
Questions? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby,
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell,
Yes.
Ms. Sharp, Mrs. Rosales,
Yes.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
and Mrs. Bratton.
Yes. Policy passes. I.
Policy 4.301, interscholastic athletics, adds language to allow homeschool students to participate in interscholastic athletics in schools that are not members of TSSAA or TMSAA pursuant to a change in state law.
Questions on interscholastic athletics? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Darby,
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell,
Yes.
Ms. Sharp, Mrs. Rosales, Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell,
Yes.
and Mrs. Bratton.
Yes. Policy passes. J, library materials.
Policy 4.403, library materials, adds language pursuant to change in state law.
Any questions? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Rosales,
Yes.
Ms. Sharp, Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell,
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell,
Yes.
Mrs. Darby,
Yes.
and Mrs. Bratton.
Yes. J passes. K,
Policy 4.600, grading system, changes dual enrollment courses from 4 percentage points to 5 percentage points pursuant to change in state law, updates language for middle school students taking high school courses.
questions or comments? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Ms. Sharp, Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales,
Yes.
Mrs. Darby,
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell,
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell,
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton.
Yes. Policy passes. Page 2.
Policy 4.602, grade point average, GPA 9 through 12, changes dual enrollment courses from 4 percentage points to 5 percentage points pursuant to change in state law, updates language for middle school students taking high school courses.
Do you have any questions? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Maxwell,
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales,
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell,
Yes.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mrs. Darby,
Yes.
Ms. Sharp, and Mrs. Bratton.
Yes. Policy passes. M.
4.603, promotion and retention, adds language to allow parents, guardians to voluntarily retain students in grades K2 with certain conditions, adds language for a new promotion pathway to the 5th grade cohort pursuant to change in state law, adds language to defined high school cohort.
Roll call vote. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, roll call vote. I'm going to lose my place. There are 3 pages of
Need
this.
to, we do need,
We do. I knew I was leaving something out. Thank you, Ms. Rosales. I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second it.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell,
Yes.
Mrs. Darby,
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell,
Yes.
Ms. Sharp, Mrs. Rosales, and Mrs. Bratton.
Yes. Policy passes. N.
Policy 4.6041, testing for credit, adds French 1 as an approved course.
Anyone have any questions or comments? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve. Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mr. Tidwell,
Yes.
Mrs. Darby,
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell,
Yes.
Ms. Sharp, Mrs. Rosales,
Yes.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
and Mrs. Bratton.
Yes. Policy passes. O.
Policy 4.605, graduation requirements, removes language for homebound students to another policy, adds IB mathematics for allowable course substitutions.
Questions or comments? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Darby, Yes. Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp? Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
And Mrs. Bratton?
Policy 606, activities as student policy 4.1.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve. Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Rosales? Ms. Sharp? Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell? Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. Policy 4.606 passes. Policy 5115.
Policy 5.115, assignment transfer, changes notification of transfer of employees.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Do I have a second? Second. Thank you. Roll call vote.
Ms. Sharp?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
No.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. Policy passes. Policy 5.118.
Background investigations, updates language to reflect the practice of the district that people who appear on the sex offender registry shall not be employed by the district.
Questions or comments? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve. Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp? Yes. And Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. Policy passes. R. No, that was R, sorry.
Policy 5.307, physical assault leave, adds language to expand leave from teachers to any employee as a result of physical assault resulting from their employment duties pursuant to a change in state law.
Questions or comments on this policy? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you. Second? One of you needs to second it.
Second.
Thank you, dear. Roll call vote.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp? Yes. Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
And Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. Policy 57.701.
Substitute teachers, adds annual school safety training for substitute teachers pursuant to a change in state law.
Are there any questions or comments? This is our Francis Rosales policy.
Yes, and I meant to bring the bill signed by the governor. So I just want to thank the governor's office for mailing it to me and sending the signed copy with his signature. And I meant to bring it, but
You can still bring it.
I'll bring it for another show.
Bring it. Bring it for show and tell.
Yeah.
All right. Any questions or comments on this? Thank you. I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you. Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp? Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
And Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. Policy passes. Policy 5.802.
Qualifications and duties of directors of schools, adds language requiring the director of schools to report if an educator has pleaded guilty, nolo contendere to, or has been convicted or otherwise found guilty of certain offenses in another jurisdiction pursuant to a change in state law.
Thank you. Questions or comments on this policy? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp? Yes. Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell,
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton,
Yes. Policy passes. Policy 6.200.
Changes language for acceptance of excused absence notes, also updates absences for classes on a 4x4 or modified block schedule.
Thank you. Questions or comments on this policy? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Rosales? Yes. Ms. Sharp? Yes. Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. Policy passes. W.
Policy 6.2011, voluntary pre-K attendance, updates district contact information for the pre-K program.
Questions or comments on this policy? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Ms. Sharp?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. Policy passes. X.
6.203, school admissions, adds language-aligned principles to request information regarding certain delinquent offenses of students pursuant to change in state law.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you. Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell? Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. Policy passes. Page 3.
Policy 6.300, Code of Conduct, adds language requiring law enforcement and director of schools to be immediately notified of an assault on school property, adds a separate category of assault of an LEA employee pursuant to a change in state law.
Questions or comments on this policy? I will entertain a motion. Thank you. Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell? Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp?
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. Policy passes. Z.
Policy 6.3041, Title IX and sexual harassment, postponed from the meeting on 3/18/2024, changes timeline for notice before beginning investigation and changes timeline for completion of investigations. Doing a note, this has nothing to do with the new Title IX guidelines.
Yes. Questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mr. Tidwell? Mrs. Darby?
No.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp?
No.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. Policy passes. Policy AA.
6.3090, tolerance offenses, adds language that a valid threat of mass violence should be determined by a threat assessment team pursuant to a change in state law.
Questions or comments on zero tolerance offenses? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp? Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. Policy passes. Double B.
6.316, suspension, adds language that invalid threats of mass violence is determined by a threat assessment team can still result in suspension. Adds that a student can be suspended from school-sponsored activities for 1 year for an assault of an employee pursuant to a change in state law.
Thank you. Questions? Comments? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp?
Yes.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell,
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell,
Yes.
Mrs. Darby,
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton.
Yes. Policy passes. C.
Policy 6.318, admission of suspended or expelled students, adds language allowing principals to request information regarding certain delinquent offenses of students pursuant to a change in state law.
Questions or comments? I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Ms. Sharp? Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton.
Yes. Policy passes. Double D.
Policy 6.409, reporting child abuse, adds requirement the director of schools submit the names of the child abuse coordinator and an alternate for each school to the Department of Children's Services pursuant to a change in state law.
Questions or comments on reporting child abuse?
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton.
Yes. Policy passes. Will now move to new policies.
Still got one more.
Where is it?
EE.
Oh, EE, I'm sorry.
6.415, student suicide prevention, updates language for clarity and consistency.
Thank you. Questions or comments? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp? Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton.
Yes. Policy 6.415 passes. Now we will move to new policies. A.
Policy 3.2051, school resource officers' involvement in curriculum implementation, postponed from meeting on 3/18/24. Policy for SRO's involvement in curriculum implementation adds language for which class can be used for sessions.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp?
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton.
Yes. Policy passes. B.
Policy 4.213, family life education, policy for instruction on family life curriculum.
Questions? I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you. Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp?
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
And Mrs. Bratton.
Yes. Family life policy passes. C.
Policy 4.214, use of artificial intelligence programs, policy for use of artificial intelligence for instructional and assignment purposes.
Questions on policy 4.214? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mrs. Bratton.
Yes. Policy passes. D.
Policy 6.4052, opioid antagonist, policy for possession and maintenance of opioid antagonists.
Questions? Comments? I'll entertain a motion.
Ms. Bratton,
Yes, sir.
I have a question. I mean, this is written up. I know there was a little talk about this particular one in how we didn't completely agree with the way it's written, but it is written to state law.
Yes,
Like, we don't have much movement on this, right?
Yes, sir. That was a good thing to point out. That is true. We just don't really have a lot of choice in that. Anyone else? I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you. Thank you. Roll call vote.
Ms. Sharp? Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mrs. Rosales?
Yes.
Mrs. Darby?
Yes.
Mr. Tidwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Won't change anything? No.
Mrs. Bratton?
Yes. Policy passes. And we understand why you said that. You had those questions the other night. All right. Now, we don't have to do number 2, right? Because we did it.
Yeah, not that number.
Not that number.
So we're good with policies.
We're done. That's what I'm thinking. We can flip over. We do not have to do number 2 on policies because we voted on each one of these separately. Having the first and final reading, I felt like it was best that we went through those as slowly as possible for the public to understand. Now, number 2, Visitor Code of Conduct.
A change in Tennessee State Law, Public Acts of 2024, Chapter 810 requires the board to adopt a code of conduct for visitors, which describes the type of behavior expected from a visitor entering on school grounds and the consequences of a visitor's failure to adhere to the standards. The code must emphasize the importance of appropriate language, respect for the person and property of others, and for establishing and maintaining a safe, secure, and peaceful educational setting that promotes learning and positive character development. The code must be placed where visitors can see it, be posted to the district and school websites, and a printed copy given to parents and students. Recommended motion to approve the Visitor Code of Conduct as presented.
Do we have questions or comments on Visitor Code of Conduct? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Is there anyone wishing to abstain? Visitor Code of Conduct passes. Number 3, approved fees.
2425 approved fees per policy 6.709. Prior to the beginning of each school year, the board, upon the recommendation of the principals and director of school, shall approve all student fees for the upcoming school year. Additional fees may be approved during the year as needed. Recommended motion to approve the fee list is presented for the 2425 school year.
Are there any questions or comments on approved fees? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve. Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Anyone wishing to abstain? Policy. Sorry, I just did 10,000 policies. Motion passes. Number 10, engineering and construction.
First, request for a digital sign for Smyrna Primary School. Principal Jason Eaton is requesting to purchase a new digital sign through the TIPS bid process. The new sign will be provided by Golden Rule at a cost of $26,678.12. Will be funded through school accounts. This request is at no cost to the board. Engineering and Construction has reviewed the request and has no objection. Recommended motions to approve the digital sign request at Smyrna Primary School as presented.
Questions or comments on the sign? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Anyone wishing to abstain? The sign passes.
All right, number 2, request for baseball turf installation. Principal Justin Smith of Blackman High School is requesting to install synthetic turf to the home plate and pitcher's mound areas. The cost for this request is $26,885 and will be awarded to STS Distribution. The funds for this project will come from the Blackman High School baseball account. This request will be at no cost to the board. Engineering and Construction has reviewed the request and has no objection. Recommended motions to approve the Blackman High School baseball turf request as presented.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you. Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Anyone wishing to abstain? Motion passes. Number 2, naming request.
Principal Steve Luker is requesting to name the Rockville High School football field in honor of Homer Brown. Mr. Brown is an original 1955 Rockville High graduate and community member. Recommended motions to approve the renaming of the Rockville High School football field as presented.
Questions or comments? Mr. Luker's here if anyone needs to ask him a question. You got one? Go right ahead.
Do we know when dedication is yet? Before, after,
August.
halftime?
Halftime, August 23rd.
Ms. Bratton?
Yes, my dear.
Mr. Luker, will you please invite the board for us to come? Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, sir?
I've heard that it looks really, really good.
It's exciting, isn't it?
It is exciting.
Anyone else? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Anyone wishing to abstain? Mr. Luker, you have your new name. All right, we are going to look at number 12. So I have several things I'm going to have to be doing here. You're going to have to bear with me. We're going to have to be flipping some pages. I do have a copy of the evaluation printed for you. I will be following TSBA's protocol and I'm not Tammy Grissom, but I will do my best to try to do it the way that she does. Our 2024 Rutherford County Director of Schools evaluation, we will start looking at Appendix A. So I'm going to give everyone a chance to look at Appendix A. And we do not read all of this, folks. We only read the survey average. So as I go through this, I will be reading the survey average. This evaluation is done on a rating out of 5, 5 being the highest. Appendix A is the administrator's perceptions of director's performance. Dr. Sullivan scored a 4.65 on that criteria. On the next page, we see the comments. Tammy Grissom has always read those comments, so I will do so also. Dr. Sullivan is an exceptional leader. He is extremely knowledgeable, problem solver, advocates for all stakeholders, and is a forward, innovative thinker. Dr. Sullivan is the epitome of a servant leader. He serves the Rutherford County Schools community with the needs of students always at the forefront and the needs of his administrators and teachers right behind that. He truly listens to his administrators and provides knowledgeable feedback and support. Dr. Sullivan has created a team at the central office that strongly serves and supports all schools at all levels, creating a district that is unified as opposed to one that is made up of soloed schools. I strongly believe that the Rutherford County Schools is the best district in the state of Tennessee, and this is very much due to the hard work that Dr. Sullivan has put in as a district leader and now director of schools. I cannot imagine working for a better leader and mentor. I continue to be pleased with how Dr. Sullivan is leading the district. His effective leadership has brought clarity and positive changes that have proven beneficial for all. I appreciate his commitment to consistently take actions needed to advance our district. Dr. Sullivan breeds an atmosphere of mutual respect with his coworkers, and he continuously strives for student-focused decisions and outcomes. Best director we've ever had, and he deserves many more years in the role. Dr. Sullivan leads in a manner that makes others want to follow. He possesses knowledge, integrity, and a respectful demeanor. The same group is used for most committees, resulting in the same group benefiting. Dr. Sullivan is one of the best directors of schools I've ever worked for. Dr. Sullivan is an incredible leader. The director has done an exceptional job. Dr. Sullivan consistently seeks to keep principals informed about upcoming legislation considerations and is extremely transparent in all areas of school business. The most appreciated aspect of his administration is that he trusts the principals to make decisions that are prescriptive and believed to be in the best interest of the stakeholders in their buildings. He consistently projects positivity and respect for all employees. Dr. Sullivan is a great leader and cares about those in our school system. He is relatable, but also holds us accountable for high achievement. He is a pleasure to work for. Fantastic job, especially considering some of the board members he has to work with. Dr. Sullivan does a great job communicating and working with principals to ensure all students receive a great education. He also works tirelessly with and for our community. Dr. Sullivan maintained outstanding relationships with all stakeholders, community members, board members, administrators, district employees, students in year 2. Leading a district the size of Rutherford County Schools is a thankless position, but Dr. Sullivan continues to put students first and leads with his heart. And then there was a response from an administrator that says, I have only been with the system for 6 months and therefore have not had the opportunity to be evaluated by the director of schools. The next page is Appendix B, Board Observational Data. His average was 3.87. The next one is Community Relationships. His average was 4.15. Next is Staff and Personnel Relationships, 4.45. Facilities, Finance, and Human Resources, 4.32. Vision, 4.19. Student Achievement, 4.34. Management and Operations, 4.11. Integrity, Fairness, and Ethics, 4.22. Political, Social, and Cultural Context, 4.20. The next page is what I just read to you, so you can go to the following page. Appendix C, Achievement of Board Goals and Strategic Plan. The average is 4.34. We will be returning to this appendix in just a moment. Performance Objective 2, develop a school district strategic plan, 4.14. And Performance Objective number 5, work with the school board to develop and implement an annual plan for promoting school system and increasing communication and support with the county commission and city council. His performance objective average is 4.10. As a score, an overall score, Dr. Sullivan has scored overall evaluation score of 4.27. I would like for the board to please flip back to the Appendix C, Achievement of Board Goals and Strategic Plan. I would like to direct your attention to these indicators. 1.6, 1.7, 1.8, 1.9. 1.6 says graduation rate above 95% graduation rate for applicable cohort. 1.7 says TVAS system-wide literacy score at a level 3 or higher. 1.8 TVAS system-wide numeracy scored at a level 3 or higher. 1.9 says TVAS system-wide composite scores at a level 3 or higher. These scores do not reflect the data that we have. Sometimes people don't always understand exactly what they are marking, and believe me, I've been in education 48 years, and sometimes I don't understand data either. However, these scores are incorrect. Dr. Sullivan and our district have scored 5 on every one of these. Therefore, these scores should be 5s. I have consulted with Chuck Cagle, and this is what he has said. It is my opinion that the error in scoring Appendix C should be called to the board's attention and corrected. I am sure that the evaluation format was approved by both the board, and the board needs to know that the approved evaluation format has not been followed. In my opinion, it is not ever out of line to ask that the score be corrected to reflect the addition of accurate data. On objective measures such as this, it is not unusual for the person or entity conducting the evaluation to simply insert the proper data scores at the appropriate points so that any confusion may be avoided. I would suggest that this provision be added to next year's evaluation procedure and agreed on by the parties. We will be voting on an evaluation form at the end of the month. Therefore, I am requesting that TSBA resend us 1.6, 1.7, 1.8, and 1.9 to be reevaluated by this board and submitted to TSBA, and the new score be submitted to me by August 22nd. I've also consulted with Tammy Grissom, and she says that that is the proper thing to do. Do I have questions?
Ms. Bratton?
Yes, ma'am.
So we don't need to vote on this at all?
No, ma'am, you do not.
Okay.
But thank you for asking.
Well, just want to make
Thank you for asking. You do not have to vote on this. I have consulted. There's been a mistake, and you are going to get a chance to correct it, and it will come to you by email, just as this came to you by email, and you will resubmit it. I will also submit to you the proper data that you can look at that is easy to read so that you can see that this was not graded correctly. We will receive a new evaluation score at the last board meeting. Do I have any questions on that? Thank you very much. Insurance.
We did our benefits coordinator interviews today, and so we are looking at making a recommendation on that new position. Also, as we talked about the other day, we'll be doing our open enrollment the first 2 weeks in October, and as well as reviewing in September our rates that we want to propose for our county rates.
Thank you. They mentioned us retirees by any chance?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. I left out something, and I'm so sorry. There are comments on the very, very back of this. You have to turn it all the way over. These are the additional comments. Dr. Jimmy Sullivan continues to be an exemplary director in all areas. He is an outstanding instructional leader, as well as a role model for our community. He demonstrates the epitome of strength and courage in his everyday life as he leads our outstanding district to even greater heights. His success as our director, his commitment to students and teachers, and his dedication to the profession of teaching and learning are inspirational. Rutherford County is proud to call him ours. It has been a pleasure to watch Dr. Sullivan excel in his position as director of the 4th largest school system in Tennessee. Even with the challenges of tremendous growth, our county has faced, he has led us valiantly. Area needing improvement, sharing accurate information when asked, whether it is district favorable or not. I'm sorry I left that out. this has now become public, so that's why we all waited until I could report. So I'm sure that we will be asked about this, perhaps even from Scott Broden or someone. But you do realize that your score is not correct because the other needs to be rescored to level 5. Thank you. Financial report.
We have Mr. Runyon at the budget meeting tonight, just in case there were any questions about our request for design fees, even though it's not up for them to vote on. We wanted to make sure that we had a representative in case questions were asked. And then we received our first, TISA, first, I don't know, the number changes all the time, TISA estimate. We are now up to, as I sent to the board yesterday, 14 million. With charter school enrollment, we will have a true up over the next couple weeks, I am sure, to get accurate information, but that was taken directly out of TISA once we get our first payment.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone have any questions about that? Director's update.
Yeah, so enrollment is extremely high. I sent the board this morning enrollment, we were at 52,001. Unfortunately, that trend, or fortunately, I guess, it's kids we get to serve, that trend went the wrong way today. We increased to 52,070 as of today. So normally at this time of the year, we are dropping students that withdraw and move, and we don't have their withdrawals yet. I still envision that fluctuating over the next couple of days. Wow. That number does include 187 students for Springs and Power Academy. It does not include American Classical, though, because they don't use Skyward. Yep. So 52,070.
You're going to keep us updated.
I will
as
keep
this
you
rolls
updated.
on. Okay.
I envision still probably some fluctuation in kindergarten. Kindergarten doesn't start until Monday.
Oh, that's true.
I anticipate some fluctuation with middle school as well. Those are especially in the city limits, but back and forth between Murfreesboro City and Rutherford County. I anticipate middle school numbers fluctuating.
And decide 6th grade, sometimes you're not sure where they're going to decide to go.
Dr. Sullivan, does that include the RCP students?
Does not.
So it's not including ACAR or RCP, just Springs?
Yep, just because they're the only ones that use Skyward.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yep.
Just, can you give a rough estimate of how, like, the difference between last year's numbers and right now? I know that it's not, the real.
From this same date as of last year, we're up about 1,700.
So we're up about 1,700. And that is the number of students that we predict to get this year. That we've been training every year is 1,200 students, and we actually already achieved that.
As of right now. Again, I am hoping some of that drops.
That means there's still in the course of the year, there's still going to be a probability that we will still be trending that amount.
Without a doubt, we'll add throughout the year.
Yes.
Always add.
So that is insane.
Blackman Middle is at 1726 today.
It is.
That Blackman Middle.
Wow.
1726.
All right.
Now,
Thank you, sir. You have anything else? Any more good news to tell us?
Pull up Rockville Middle, 15.
Okay.
15,
Rockville Middle.
1568.
Okay, Rockville Middle is 1568, and Blackman Middle
1726.
is 1726.
Wow.
And what I want to call out especially for Rockville is we added classrooms to Rockville, but Rockville did not get an additional gym, extra hallway space, any of that. So it absolutely shows the need for the middle school on the Beatty property, because those...
As quickly as possible. That's
two
going to happen.
Those two are hurting, for sure.
Hurting bad. 16 and 17, we know where we are on that, don't we, Ms. Rosales? You have something on that?
Yeah. I visited all 51 schools over 2.5 days and talked to all of our faculties for about 5 minutes, and really the message this year is making sure that we remember the human element, because although we have test scores, we have all those different types of things, student outcomes, which are very important, we have to remember we work with humans, and we have to do what's best for the people we serve and for our teachers, students, kids, parents. That is really what our focus is for this school year.
Thank you. We always want to remember we're there for one reason.
People.
We're there for one reason. We are there for our people. General discussion.
Ms. Brown?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Sullivan, I hate to go back to this, but what was the enrollment number that we did our operational budget around?
Give me 1 second.
I know,
It's 50,700, I believe.
50,700?
Yeah, I can give you the exact number.
Okay.
I'd say I'd ask Brian, but. Team Edu funding. It is 50,751.
50,700.
51.
Yes.
751.
So we added 400 students throughout the year last year. From first day, 50,300. By the time we ended, our average was 50,751. And now we're at,
151. But today, starting today, we've already brought
Oh, yeah, we're-
1,700 new students.
from last year, yeah.
So we've already met the trend
Yeah,
for the
we're-
year, and we haven't even started.
So all of those
And
students,
and let's not talk about all the issues we've had with the operational costs, but it's just mind-boggling to me that,
and we educate all of those students on our own with all local funding for a full
yeah,
year.
exactly. So I think that just needs to be stated. Ms. Bratton? since
Yes,
it's
ma'am.
General discussion, I have to point something. I wasn't going to say anything, but I have not seen this performance evaluation at all till just now, and I didn't read it, I didn't look at it, I didn't do anything. So I just want to say something that really stood out to me in reading it the second year is that when it comes to the administrators, it hasn't changed about their perception about Dr. Sullivan. It is still the same as it was the first year. So that speaks volumes to Dr. Sullivan's leadership and continuing to lift the morale throughout the district. And it's pretty evident because we have filled out of all of our classified and certified spots. So that's kudos to everyone, Dr. Sullivan, including you and the team. And the other thing I was going to bring out, because it was a little bit unsettling, because I feel like when you read it, to me, the way I interpret it is that there's some misguidance as if wanting not to be transparent when it comes to data collection. I can attest, and I'm only speaking me, myself, and I, but as a board member who's asked for information from everyone, from Dr. Sullivan to Trey to Dr. Chastain and whoever, I have never experienced any hesitation about giving any information at all. I've been given whatever I've been asked or needed or whatever. So to have this comment to say that area needing improvement, sharing accurate information when asked whether it's district favorable or not, I personally have never experienced that. And so I just felt like it needed to be out on the open, publicly been stated, because it kind of misleads as if there's trying to do more hiding information or not, of a lack of transparency. So I just wanted to say, from my experience, I've never experienced that. So that's all I want
Thank
to
you,
say.
Ms. Rosales. We appreciate that. Anyone else? Anyone else in general discussion? Oh, Mr. Tidwell, I'm sorry, I didn't see your finger up there.
That's okay. Unfortunately, I won't be able to attend, but I did want to still call out the Walter Hill celebration. We usually have more eyeballs on this board meeting than we typically do on the work session. I know that Mr. Young had brought it up, so just wanted to reiterate that.
I'm so glad you reminded people. I'm hoping I'm able to go and hold my Mother's DAR picture up. Anyone else?
Yes, ma'am.
11, it's the, Mr. Young, 11, Walter Hill, 11 to 1, okay.
Yeah, it starts at 11.
He had a transportation update.
You do? We would love to hear it, sir.
You may not, but.
You may not.
Yes, sir.
I promise.
Hello, sir. We
Promised an update from the work
hearing.
session.
Yes.
We reported 66 students that were currently being transported to Browns Chapel on Tuesday. We're up to 83 in 2 days. Wow. We currently have 2 buses. Both are at max capacity. We are looking to add a 3rd bus, and it's probably going to take a week to 10 days to get that 3rd bus up and running. We are also treating this route like we would any other special education route. It typically takes 3 days when a student hits our door for us to get them assigned to a bus, because typically with a special education bus, we have to shift students from one bus to another, and these are becoming the same way. because they're individualized routes. So we've instructed the schools, so if you hear it's taken 2 to 3 days for students to get assigned to a bus, that's why. That's not unusual. So I did want to bring that out. We are still currently transporting 69 students to Stewartsboro. We have a new issue this year. I talked to Dr. Sullivan a little bit about it today. With the continued growth in our wonderful county, we have a larger than normal amount of subdivisions that are not reaching their 80 to 90% completion rate. Most municipalities require developers, when they're building a new subdivision, that upon completion of 85 to 90% of the dwellings in that phase, they have to put the finished asphalt down. Our developers are shrinking their phases and learning to build percentages and not completing that phase and starting another phase. So they're not achieving that 90% that requires them to do the final pavement, which means all the water sewer valve boxes, all your sanitary sewer lids, all of those are sticking up anywhere from 2 to 3 inches. I'm kind of in the middle. We have a few contractors that are willing to drive into these newer subdivisions and dodge these cast iron and steel structures, and we have some contractors that are refusing to do so. I don't know, and I'm not an attorney, it's going to be hard to make a contractor force them to drive in there and without us taking responsibility for any damage to their buses. They're huge investments, and I don't know where I sit. The flip side of that is, if we don't tell the drivers that they are required to go into these subdivisions, we're going to have students that are going to be walking further than our 0.2 of a mile. I feel like your phones are going to ring either way. I'm bringing it to your attention because currently we have over 20 buses. And it's not isolated. It's scattered across the county. Stewart's Creek areas, the Rockville areas being the heaviest impacted. I started out with just one small subdivision, and because it was a small number of children, I elected to keep the bus stop like it was last year, which meant the students walked a little bit further than the 0.2 of a mile. This is blowing up. A lot of the streets, it takes months after they're completed before they get into the county's GIS system for us to pick them up. We actually have addresses that don't show on the county's GIS. That's not unusual, and I'm not pointing a finger at them. It's just, it takes time for them to get there. So we're establishing routes on streets that technically don't exist, but they're there. But those streets are not finished paved. It's a difficult decision, and it's something that we're probably going to be asking your opinion on. So I bring it up tonight because we are struggling with it. We're also struggling with some overcrowding, which is nothing new, but we're struggling more so this year in the Siegel and Rockville area, and we are watching those buses. I know a number of you all get phone calls, so I'm trying to bring these things to your attention so that you're aware of it. Ms. Darby has a question.
Trey, is it possible to get, I hate to ask this, but I feel like if we're going to be asked to kind of make a decision, can we find out approximately how many subdivisions and how far
They're being
asking?
How far it is
Like if they were to pull up at the front of a subdivision, because they're not going to go back into it, like how far would the furthest walk be so that we just
Close-
have an idea?
Close to a half mile.
Okay, so you know already.
Yes, ma'am. Close to a half mile.
And how many subdivisions total?
I'm going to say 6 to 8.
So 6 to 8 subdivisions, the longest walk being about a half a mile.
Yes, ma'am. And we're fielding some pretty mad parents.
Is that in all grade bands?
Yes, ma'am. And what makes it difficult for us is because right now I can't force somebody to do that. I don't feel like. So I have an elementary driver that feels comfortable driving in there, and then the middle school contractor says I'm not. That makes it a little more difficult for us to explain to the parent why one will and one won't. I don't do, that's my point. They own their equipment. We have gone so far as to reach out to the local bus center to see if they're seeing any, they do maintenance on most of the buses here in the county. Have they started seeing, additional damage to buses? The local tire shops to see if they're seeing, unusual increased damage. They're saying no, but this is a new phenomenon. This is not something, we had one street last year that we dealt with this. We've got quite a few, so I feel like they haven't seen it because it's just beginning to see something that we haven't seen in the past. We've seen little pockets of it, but it's growing and it's going to continue. We've reached out. I sat on the planning commission for a while in my city. Those most of those ordinances are law. It's their city law. It's the development's got to be 85 to 90% complete before they can force the developer to pave. And until they get there, there's nothing they can do about it. Yes, sir?
Could we put out some communication to those parents and explain to them the dilemma we're in, and maybe they can put some pressure on the developer to go through and protect those areas of raw metal sticking up?
That they have taken, we've had one that has offered to do that, and they've gone in there and put some sloped asphalt. We do the same thing. The first time it rains, it's gone. And they're going to say we did it once, and they're not going to want. And I'm not pointing a finger at them, but I know how it's going to go. They're going to do it. It's like me fighting with one of our contractors. They're going to do it the first time, and then it's going to rain, and it's going to wash out, and they're not going to want to do it the second and the third and the fourth, because what they're doing is delaying having to put that finished asphalt down till the development's almost finished so that they reduce their risk of the concrete trucks and the heavy trucks damaging the street and them having to fix it.
I get it. I mean, I understand exactly why they do it. But at the same time, I don't know that we can force our bus drivers to.
And we're not going to be able to force the developers to do anything either, and the local municipalities are not either. So it's one of those nice catch-22s. But I am bringing it to your attention because we are having quite a few contractors, and I don't blame them. Their buses went up $35,000 this year, between last year and this year, and that's with nowhere.
Well, just the tire alone, I'm sure, cost quite a bit of money.
I don't disagree. So, but you're going to hear about it. It's going to be on Facebook. You're going to get some phone calls. We're not ignoring either party. We're trying to figure, and that's why I'm bringing it to y'all tonight. We're trying to figure out how do we, and right now, I don't feel comfortable forcing a driver, and I don't know that telling them whatever I would tell them is going to change their mind. So we're, instructing the parents at where the stop is, where the driver feels comfortable picking the children up.
Questions about that? Mr. Tidwell?
Is this more of a city issue? Are most of these subdivisions in the city, or are they out in the county?
They're in Smyrna city limits, they're in Murfreesboro city limits, and they're in the county.
So it's kind of spread out?
It's spread out.
A lot of these subdivisions, especially the ones that are partially completed have a construction entrance. It seemed like that would be a reasonable option for a lot of these developers. Just in case you, yeah. Have a great day.
Yes, sir?
He's nodding.
He's not.
Yeah, I know. You know I know, and I know you know.
It's a box.
Yep.
Anyone else? Thank you. Dr. Sullivan.
I think it's appropriate for us to, we can sometimes take for granted because of how good of a school system this is, how well school starts. I want to thank our central office team and principals first. Our central office team, of course, is here all year. Our principals didn't start back until July 8th. Our APs, our assistant principals, didn't start back until July 18th. Our teachers started back a week ago today, and our EAs started back on Monday. And so to get a organization up and moving that is 60,000 people strong on a staggered schedule, I just want to thank everyone because we couldn't do it. There's no way we could do it, and you can see that. It is a true, everyone moving and pulling in the same direction, and I greatly appreciate it.
Dismissal at Lascassas Elementary is as beautiful. It is as beautiful as choreography. I just sit in amazement sometimes watching them, and I know it's that way at all of our schools, that they can, Ashley, I'm sure that it's that way at your school, that they can get those children out there and in those cars. I don't know why they're just not doing like air traffic controllers. I think they do a better job. But kudos to our schools. They have once again risen to our high expectations, and that's nice to know. Anyone else? Katie?
Were you guys able to happen to do the update on the innovative school models and where those projects sat in the?
Put my mint in. I thought we were done.
Sorry.
It was in the email as a link. I think
If you sent it this afternoon, I haven't been back at my computer.
So what you will
Sorry.
have a document within an email that includes some additional information on the different CTE grants and what can be allocated from each of those. And at the very top is a breakdown of the allocations to every high school and middle school and the CTE program of study that it attributes, as well as a list of the items that are either have been purchased or are in the process of being purchased. So you will see those and where we are in terms of expenditures. But if there's anything additional, just reach out. I'm happy to send you more information if that doesn't satisfy the update. Or I can go through it. It's up to y'all.
It's okay, we can read.
Okay.
Try.
We know,
I sent you all the email of all the drawings, but John has it. If he's going to put it up right quick, just so you can get an idea what Dr. Sullivan was talking about.
Okay.
We hope. There's the rendering. It is two-story. It is a little bit different.
Katie, look at the name. I thought you'd like to see that. That is
There is the
beautiful.
first floor plan. It basically is, if you walked up to a middle school, Stewart's Creek, Rockvale, it's basically that same floor plan. And behind that would be the second wing, but we've taken that second wing and moved it on top, which elongates it, the wing itself, but it actually shortens the building.
Right, the footprint
From
is
front
shorter.
to back,
yeah.
from the front door to the cafeteria is about half as long as it used to be, and Dr. Sullivan
Which is
used to
great
say-
because it
Yeah.
drove me nuts.
That's a long
can't
walk.
see
It's
all
a
the
long
kids.
walk.
Dr. Gagne would
Sorry
love
about that,
to
sir.
ride
It's
his
a long-
Segway around, but,
Yeah,
but there's the
and
second
that's the
floor.
second floor, okay.
Ms.
Oh,
Brown.
wow. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry.
Trey, is this floor plan similar to Salem Elementary, new Salem Elementary?
We can't build like they build.
I'm sorry?
We would get in
Can't
trouble
build
by the county commission if we built like they built.
Oh, okay. Well, because
I'll say.
they're 2 stories too. And
Yeah.
they have like the elongated hallway, so that's
But
why.
it's going to look different.
But this has been emailed to all of y'all, so if you have any
Thank you.
questions or anything, just
Did
please
we
let me
get
know.
did we get that too? Did we get that email?
You did get that as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
The board would like to give you this and say we are very, very, very sincere condolences to the loss.
Thank you. Thank you, board. I appreciate it so much. Katie,
Move to adjourn.
Second.
thank you. We are adjourned.